For now.
Oh, I wouldn't do this in my car. Tricky hairpin. Cocky, this is tight.
The boys with the serious toys are back. All new Top Gear, Sunday at 8 on BBC Two.
Newsnight now on BBC Two with Jeremy Paxman.
Tonight, is Tony Blair so desperate to salvage something from the British presidency of the EU that he'll give up part of the budget rebate? As Europe's not-so-merry men gang up, it begins to sound that way. Even the head of the Commission has joined in.
He does not expect the British presidency to take the role of the Sheriff of Nottingham, taking from the poor to give to the rich.
All children will be taught to read like this, but who's to teach the teacher? And we've paid billions extra in taxes to fund the NHS. What's happened to it all?
Are we getting, in a sense, value for the money, the health pounds we're putting in? It's extremely difficult to find out where the money's gone.
Good evening. Remember how the British rebate on our payments to Europe was untouchable until the Union stopped using the budget to keep French farmers in the style to which they become accustomed? Well, forget it. The Prime Minister is so desperate to get a deal on the next budget that he's put part of the rebate on the table and tried to call in some favours from the Eastern Europeans whose membership he so championed. He hasn't got them on board yet, but he's certainly wound up many of the other old members. Richard Watson reports.
Righteous British archers defend Sherwood Forest from greedy oppressors who want to tax the locals to the hilt, carving up the pot of money to the detriment of the plucky Brits. Familiar story? Well, for some at least, it's being replayed as the row over the next European budget intensifies. Tony Blair wants to put the brakes on the Euro budget, suggesting today that new members of the European Union should accept less money from Brussels. But the European Commission outraged Downing Street by turning the Robin Hood metaphor on its head.
The President has made it very clear that he does not expect the British presidency to take the role of the Sheriff of Nottingham, taking from the poor to give to the rich.
We went through the full range of responses to that, including Little John, Maid Marian, Richard the Lionheart, even Saladin, I think, at one point. Look, I tell you, this is a tough situation to resolve the budget.
So Britain, which has the EU presidency for just 4 more weeks, is trying to force member states to accept a tight budget from 2007 to 2013. The problem is that 40% or so of the money is virtually untouchable because common agricultural policy spending has already been set after a series of acrimonious meetings 3 years ago, and Britain signed up.
Tony Blair made very clear at the time that he was very unhappy with that agreement. He signed up to it just for the sake of peace at the time and to make sure that France didn't do anything like block the entry of the new countries. But the second thing, which I think is more important, is that the world trade talks require further changes to farm subsidies.
But with the agricultural budget off limits, regional development aid is the next target. In the line of fire are the new accession countries who've just joined the Euro club. And we've learned that Britain has a card up its sleeve. Let's say that Poland wants to build new roads and receives 100 million euros from Brussels. Under Euro rules, it must match this funding 1 for 1, and therefore needs to find another 100 million euros from its own coffers for projects to go ahead. But in practice, this is proving impossible, Britain says, and so British officials are putting a different deal on the table to win support. Why not accept less money overall for development, they say, and in return, Europe will pay a bigger percentage of the costs. In other words, you won't have to match Brussels money 1 for 1. New members like Estonia will also hear another suggestion along similar lines. Sign up to a new tighter budget and we'll give you more time to use the money. But local political leaders will have to explain why the headline figure will be lower than a deal discussed when Luxembourg had the presidency this summer.
The British proposal is technically very clever. Give a bit less money to the East Europeans, but give them longer to use the money, because at the moment they don't really have the capacity to use it, and after 2 years you have to send the money back to Brussels if you haven't used it. So technically the East Europeans might be better off with the British proposal, but politically it's a non-starter.
We in Britain bow to no one in our commitment to Europe, and the settlement reached today underlines this.
21 years ago, Margaret Thatcher successfully argued that Britain should get a rebate because it was relatively poor, and countries like France and Germany received far more cash from Brussels because subsidies were dominated by farming, a staggering 70% of the entire budget. Remember the beef mountains and wine lakes? But today, the Europeans argue that we're considerably richer than them, and it's about time we gave it up, or at least cut it back. Britain currently pays 14.6 billion euros into the European pot, but gets back 5.3 billion as a rebate. So our net contribution is 9.3 billion euros. Brussels hands us 7 billion euros back each year, mainly for farmers and industrial development, which means we're 2.3 billion euros in the red. So even after the rebate, we pay out more than we get back. We're the fourth biggest net contributor after Germany, France and Italy.
The way things work at the moment, if nothing changes to the EU's finances, the rebate gets bigger and bigger every year. And since Britain is already the richest country in the EU, more or less, most other countries think that's unreasonable. They don't have rebates, and Britain has this special sweet deal which was fixed up 21 years ago when the situation was very different. So everybody outside Britain thinks the rebate should go.
So what's up for grabs? British negotiators may be willing to concede some points on the rebate in exchange for pressing ahead with a formal commitment to further reform of the Common Agricultural Policy, something the French ruled out when Britain took the presidency in the summer. But don't forget, the British are in a corner because agricultural spending has been frozen until 2013. This game of brinkmanship will unfold over the next few days. Tony Blair wants a commitment to discuss reform in 2008, with a view to agreeing a strategy by 2013. The precise wording of such an agreement is being worked on now, but extracting a meaningful document rather than empty promises will be very tough. What's in it for France? Well, Britain could forego some of the increases to the rebate which would otherwise accrue with the increasing budget. The portion relating to extra spending on regional development, for example, could be handed back to Brussels. In the labyrinthine world of Europolitics, a kind of rebate on the rebate.
This will go to the wire, and there will be some very fraught negotiations going on at the summit the week after next.
Tony Blair has been in Tallinn today trying to persuade them to back budget cuts. But some believe the British overtures are as welcome as the stag weekenders who flock to Estonia in search of cheap beer.
Well, earlier I spoke to Estonia's Prime Minister, Andrus Ansip, who met Tony Blair today. I put it to him that accepting less money rather than no money wasn't entirely unreasonable.
This proposal to cut those funds for 10% is, of course, not good news for us. We cannot accept this proposal.
But the fact of the matter now is that you can't spend all the money that the EU is giving you at the moment, isn't it?
I can't agree with you.
Well, how much have you spent so far?
We have spent so far 15% from all the money, right. But I will say that it's a quite good result because the best countries who used to join with the European Union before us, for example Ireland, at the same time had the level of 15%.
Can you explain to the audience watching this programme, all of whom are taxpayers in Britain, why they should pay their taxes in order to give you money?
Estonian economy is an open economy, and all the investments, they will be very welcome in Estonia. We don't have any restrictions on free movement of investments. Our market is opened for all the goods coming also from the United Kingdom.
You think there will definitely be a deal?
Let's wait for a whole proposal, and then when we will know something about figures, we can say what kind of deal there will be. If we will not get the next financial perspective very quickly, then we will have real problems in Estonia, but in all the new member states in the year 2007.
Well, with us in the studio now, the former Europe Minister Dennis McShane and the Conservatives Europe spokesman Graham Brady. Graham Brady, in the end, all deals are about compromises. This was bound, something like it to happen, wasn't it?
I think the concern is that we might get the worst of all possible worlds here. We might see less money going to the new member states, no reform of the common agricultural policy, and it's going to cost the British taxpayer more.
But you accept some sort of compromise was inevitable?
Well, I think a compromise that involved real reform of the CAP, as Mr Blair told us he needed to get in return for concessions on the British rebate, would be acceptable.
You see, I mean, it just proves yet again, you can't believe a word this government says. Well, unequivocally, Tony Blair said the rebate was not up for negotiation unless reform of the CAP was on the table. It's not.
Yes, and now we're looking at, do we help East Europe, or do we take the Tory position of not helping them at all?
Well, either of those propositions may be understandable, but neither is consonant with putting the rebate on the table, having said you won't.
What is vital is that the agro-protectionist economies, Ireland, Luxembourg, Spain, France, the rest of them, are put in front of their responsibilities. Now, Jeremy, hang on a second. We haven't yet got where the proposal will be on Monday. I don't know what it is. I mean, I've got some ideas. And then we've got the final negotiations.
But you are prepared to abandon an unequivocal commitment given in public by the Prime Minister.
No, because the rebate actually will double in the next budget period, even on the proposals that are being discussed today. So the rebate stays. The big question is...
It's a magic rebate.
It's a magic rebate, but Dennis McShane told the Daily Telegraph on Tuesday that he wouldn't accept a one-sided deal that gave ground on the rebate without ground being given on the CAP. That appears to be what we've now got on the table. And I trust that Dennis is going to join me in rejecting it.
The thought of actually saying to our friends in East Europe, the Tory position, last year, Jeremy, the Conservatives refused to support the idea of opening our labour market to friends from East Europe.
That's another point.
No, it's very important. And now...
It may be very important to you, but it's off the point in these negotiations.
I'm sorry, Jeremy. If you had the 8 East European new member states and said to them, 18 months ago, the Conservative Party in Britain said you can't come and work in Britain. And today they're saying...
This is... You're just getting off that. Stick to the
all
point.
Right, well,
we're talking about
no,
the budget negotiations
today,
currently taking place.
Jeremy,
They haven't been in government for eons.
Jeremy, and what Tony Blair's saying tonight in East Europe is Britain wants to ensure that we will help East Europeans.
Right.
Now, it's up to the France and the other countries to move. It's also up to the Conservative Party to back the government and say we want to help East Europe.
Can you explain to the millions of watching British taxpayers why precisely they should be spending their taxes on building, say, Latvian sewage farms?
I think building motorways in Poland is a very good thing.
Latvian sewage farms.
Just as lots of European taxes have been used to help build motorways and other things in my constituency of Rotherham, because this is how Europe works. Now, if you want a zero-sum game, you only get back what you put in. I'm afraid Europe isn't going to work. I think it's a good idea for British products, British companies, British services, British tourists, that we help grow all of the European economy. For the first time wait a minute, Jeremy, for the first time in Britain's membership of the European Union, our lifetime, France, under this budget, will be paying as much as Britain. I've been waiting for this for 30 years. I think it's a jolly good thing.
Oh, it's a triumph.
The idea that France pays the same as Britain, not bad. We'd never happened under the Conservatives, did it?
Historic day.
Well, we're a long way from it, aren't we? And if you look at some of the new member states, places like Estonia with their economic growth of 10% at the moment, they're doing very well because they've joined the European Union. That's a good thing. The argument shouldn't be diverted into how much cash can be transferred to the new member states. The benefits are about the rule of law, about security, and about access to the market. That's the most important thing they're gaining, and it's unfortunate, I think, that we're getting diverted into this horse trading over how much cash can be paid over to the new member states.
And we can take it from you in the event you ever formed a government again, that there will be no circumstances under which you would compromise at all on this matter.
Well, we would not compromise on the rebate without the meaningful reform that is essential. And I think the unfortunate thing here is that we could be seeing the common agricultural policy, which everybody accepts is wrong, is causing damage to the developing countries, is wrong for Europe, is inefficient.
Yeah, but it's off the agenda this month. It's not on the agenda.
Absolutely. And if that's not on the agenda, then nor should the British rebate be.
OK. Thank you both very much indeed. Now, the much-trumpeted strategy to improve children's ability to read and write has been based on a mistaken technique. That is not, of course, what the Education Secretary said when she announced today that the technique known as synthetic phonics is to be the core of the literacy programme in primary schools, but that's the flip side of her announcement. The mixture of methods used for the last 7 years will be jettisoned for a return to the traditional way. Too late for a generation of children and much harumphing from teaching unions. David Grossman reports.
Are you ready?
This is the sound of a teaching revolution. In April this year, Britannia Village Primary began using what's called synthetic phonics. The old methods were failing. Newsnight has followed their progress.
What might this word be?
Simply put, synthetic phonics means teaching the children the sounds the letters make and then getting them to blend those sounds together to form words. It's principally aimed at the youngest pupils, but Britannia's had to use it for lots of older children who'd been left behind under the old system. When we first met 9-year-old Mary Paul, her reading age was 5.
Still, down, deep notes.
Today, when we caught up with her, she nearly caught up with her age group.
The notice said, "Beware of the rubber dog." I just enjoy reading now.
You do?
Yeah, I quite find it easy now.
Since we put it in place in April, it's gone fantastically well. Our children have made quite substantial progress. We as a staff were surprised by the amount of progress they made.
Today's interim report from the former schools inspector, Jim Rose, concludes that the kind of method they use at Britannia is an example for all schools. Systematic direct teaching of synthetic phonics, it recommends, should be the first strategy taught to all children learning to read, introduced by the age of 5. Perhaps the most surprising thing about synthetic phonics is that it's controversial. After all, when you ask the average person what they think of the idea, someone who doesn't have the benefit of a PhD in educational psychology, they'll more than likely say something like this.
It doesn't sound that particularly new to me. It sounds very sensible. I would have thought most people learnt to read in exactly that way.
The reason this is controversial is because up until now, the government's national literacy strategy has only advocated using phonics as one of a number of different methods of getting children to learn to read. And even then, the kind of phonics they've advocated hasn't been one that breaks down every word into its constituent sounds. The inescapable conclusion of today's report is, up until now, the government has got it wrong.
The national literacy strategy has had some positive impact. More children are learning to read than was the case before. But it hasn't had nearly enough. I mean, we've still got 25% of 11-year-olds who leave primary school, go through to secondary school, and they can't read well enough to deal with the demands of the secondary school curriculum. 25%. If we'd had synthetic phonics from day one, when Labour came to power, I think that statistic would have been very, very significantly reduced.
The problem the government now has is finding a way to introduce systematic synthetic phonics into every single primary school. Because what Newsnight's found by following the progress here at Britannia Village School over the past 8 months is that it takes the enthusiastic commitment of every single member of staff to make the system work. Britannia had to opt out of the national literacy strategy and buy in a commercial reading programme. This also meant retraining every teacher. This needs to be handled extremely sensitively.
Anything will only work if you want to believe in it and you're all pulling together, it will work, because by that sheer energy that you all have and that kind of ideal that you have, it will work to a certain extent. But I think with us, we were so keen to improve our reading standards that we had to do something, and we as a staff decided that that was a good way forward for us.
It's no good for the Secretary of State simply to publish an edict saying everybody's got to use synthetic phonics. The head teacher in particular has got to be behind the policy. And this makes it very difficult. I mean, Ruth Kelly, Secretary of State, can say that this is what she wants. It's a wholly different matter for her actually to achieve delivery across the country.
And then there's the matter of costs. As taught at Britannia, synthetic phonics requires dozens of different sets of carefully graded books.
It's like any reading programme, there are books that go along with it from any scheme that you choose. It costs an awful lot of money to put them in place. I think if the government are saying you've got to be teaching this and you've got to be doing it in this way, then they need to be looking at what resources schools have already got, and if they need extra resourcing, who's going to pay for it? If that might not have been a choice, but a school might not have budgeted for that.
But the prize in all this isn't really measurable in money terms.
I think our teachers take real pride in seeing the children learn, and seeing one child who's really struggled just finally get something and move on is just, it's hard to describe how it feels, and it sounds quite twee to say, you can feel yourself go, oh.
And that's the sound that everyone's aiming for in this whole debate.
Sit on a hat, full stop.
Well, with us now, the Education Minister, Lord Adonis, and John Bangs of the Teachers' Union, the NUT. Lord Adonis, given that synthetic phonics is the best way of teaching reading, for how much longer will schools be allowed to continue teaching the less than best way?
Well, Jim Rose has only reported today. He's done an interim report. He's going to do a full report in the new year. And we've said that we will revise the literacy framework, which is the framework document which goes out to all schools for next September. And there will be responding to the points made in that excellent package that David Grossman just did. There will be investment by next September, and there'll be investment in teacher training and also in the materials that go to schools, because the literacy strategies put a great deal of investment in materials going to schools for teachers to use in their classes, and we'll be updating those too.
So you're going to retrain all the teachers you need to retrain in 9 months?
It's not a complete retraining. It's important to understand that phonics has always been a central part of the literacy strategy. What Jim Rose has said is that we should concentrate on the essentials of synthetic phonics within that programme. Most teachers are already familiar with the elements, so it's not as if you're starting from scratch. It's a lot of updating that needs to be done.
John Bangs, what's your assessment of how much retraining will be necessary?
Well, I'm worried about parts of the report, but I do think Jim Rose has done one central, very good thing, and that is try and shoot down the very fine and arcane debates there are between types of synthetic phonics. He says it's a futile discussion. He says, let's have a look at the principles of synthetic phonics. Right. But what I'm worried about is this. He talks about completely revising and reviewing what's called the searchlight model in the literacy strategy, which is using a number of strategies. Method, yeah. And that could lead to a lot of upheaval in schools, and I am concerned about that.
So how many teachers do you reckon need to be retrained?
Well, I think Andrew's right. I think there's an issue around phonics, and I hope it's going to be a gradualist process rather than a big jump.
Well, he's just told you it's going to happen in September next year. There's 9 months. Are we talking about the vast majority of teachers, a proportion? Are we talking hundreds, thousands, or what?
I can't estimate that because the final report hasn't come out, and I have questions about what's going to be in the final report. What's not in this first report, for example, is the linking between phonics and reading for meaning. There's nothing in there about comprehension, understanding what you read. That's going to be in the second report. So I can't see how we can assess what the training needs are until that second report comes out.
Have you assessed what the training needs are?
No, because Jim has specifically said in his first report that he will be addressing training in his second, and Ruth Kelly's asked him to do so. But we have made it clear that we will put serious investment behind this. And of course,
you say serious investment? Well, I mean, what are you thinking of?
Well, the existing materials we send out to schools in support of the literacy strategy, 84,000 copies of those have gone out, and they've been taken into schools by a whole set of regional and local trainers.
So these are
we would see that extended across the system to support the
entire new
methods as
sets
well.
of books going out to schools.
And not necessarily new books. We're talking about the training materials for teachers in actually teaching the basics of reading. You know, you don't necessarily have to change all the books that are used in the
Roughly
classes.
how many would be involved, do you think?
Oh, I think every school would want to get copies of all the new training materials.
I can't remember how many of those. What, 22,000 schools all up?
About 20,000
and primary schools are...
20,000 primary schools there are in the system. But you'd expect us, if we're giving advice to schools on training and something as essential as reading, that we send copies to every school. This isn't an insupportable burden at all.
Absolutely, but it's a huge task.
It is a big task, but think of the task we've accomplished since 1998 with the literacy strategy. In 1998, there was no literacy hour in primary schools. There was no systematic training of teachers in best practice in reading. All of that has taken place and led to very big improvements in results. So I think we can take this next step forward in a perfectly sensible way.
John Banks, we heard in that report there of the intense amount of effort that was needed in one particular school which adopted this philosophy with fantastic results, which you can't gainsay.
No,
and no one would try to gainsay them.
Absolutely.
But it involved the school in a tremendous effort and some considerable expense. How considerable would be the general upheaval, do you think?
Well, the important thing about that Britannia school was that the head teacher chose that particular method, and that was a professionally confident decision by the head teacher and staff.
Yes,
what I'm worried about is...
Hang on.
Yeah.
Let's stick to the point here.
OK.
Some teachers did not make the right decision. They are being told to take the right decision.
That's exactly the point I'm trying to make.
You may not like it, but that's what's going to happen.
No, but what I'm saying is you can take a horse to water and it won't make it drink. The point is there has to be a dialogue with the profession about the results of this report, and the next stage must be a proper dialogue with all those expert reading teachers.
You reserve the right to try to kill this off?
Certainly not. I think there's a dialogue here, and actually we haven't condemned the Rose report.
We've
had said there's some real... The dialogue is about what I've just said before. Reading is about making meaning from words. Reading is about comprehension. Reading is about, are there other ways that are necessary?
So the trade union knows better than this inquiry, does it?
Our trade union represents a whole range of expert teachers, and we listen to them.
Well, we know what this is all about. It's the educational establishment, mired in a lot of outmoded ideas, dinned into teachers at teacher training colleges,
at all,
which is the result, the consequence of which is it not, the underachievement of so many children emerging from primary schools?
No, not at all. And I'm proud of that, as Andrew is, of the 13-point jump from 1997 in the Key Stage 2 literacy results. That's something to celebrate.
How worried are you about the institutional inertia of the educational establishment in this country?
Well, in all my experience of primary school teachers, they want advice from the experts in the teaching of reading in what is best practice. So I don't see there being some great standoff between the profession and the experts in this. Indeed, Jim Rose's report has been very widely welcomed by the profession. What they want is the best advice from those people who are expert in this area, and they want proper training materials to support that.
And you're happy to go along with this consultation?
I believe that the profession will respond very fully to the report, and we will get substantial changes in practice in schools quite quickly.
OK, thank you both very much. Thank you. Now, you can watch all three of those Newsnight films charting the impact of phonics in the school featured in David Grossman's report on our website, bbc.co.uk/newsnight. Now, coming up on the programme, are we getting value for money for the billions of pounds we poured into the NHS? Before that, though, a roundup of today's news. Our main story tonight, the government appears to be edging towards an offer to give up part of Britain's controversial European rebate in an effort to break the deadlock on the EU budget. The Conservative spokesman on Europe, Graham Brady, said the government's current approach was unlikely to deliver any real results.
We might get the worst of all possible worlds here. We might see less money going to the new member states, no reform of the common agricultural policy, and it's going to cost the British taxpayer more.
But you accept some sort of compromise was inevitable?
Well, I think a compromise that involved real reform of the CAP, as Mr Blair told us he needed to get in return for concessions on the British rebate, would be acceptable.
Two cousins from Liverpool are tonight beginning long prison sentences for the racist murder of the black teenager Anthony Walker. Paul Taylor, whose 20 and 17-year-old Michael Barton were convicted yesterday at Liverpool Crown Court. Today, the judge gave both life sentences. Taylor will serve a minimum of 24 years and Barton 18 years, minus the time they spent on remand. The judge, Mr Justice Levison, described the killing as poisonous, racist thuggery. A series of disturbing video clips purporting to show employees of a UK security firm shooting at Iraqi civilians have been circulating on the internet. The authenticity of the footage can't be verified. Aegis, who won a $300 million contract from the US government last year to operate in Iraq, said in a statement Aegis has established a formal board of inquiry in cooperation with the US military authorities to investigate whether the footage has any connection with the company, should that prove to be the case, under what circumstances any incident took place. 5 members of an Albanian gang who forced young women into prostitution have been jailed for between 5 and 18 years each. Southwark Crown Court in London heard that the women, mainly from Eastern Europe, were tricked into travelling to Britain with promises of well-paid work. Once here, they were forced to work in brothels. The European Central Bank has raised the cost of borrowing for the first time in 5 years. The increase of 0.25% takes the main interest rate in 12 countries using the euro to 2.25%. The bank is acting to keep a lid on inflation, which has been above its target for most of this year. 2 American window cleaners had a narrow escape after high winds sent their cradle crashing into a skyscraper in Denver yesterday. The men were 12 stories high when the winds hit, smashing their platform into several windows. Firefighters eventually pulled the 2 men to safety through a window. One of the men suffered minor injuries. The markets, the FTSE 100 share index closed up. In New York, the Dow Jones was also up against the euro. The pound was up against the dollar. The pound was also up. The National Health Service is in debt. The government admitted today that there might be a hole in its accounts of over £600 million. The government's at a loss to explain where the money has gone. In fact, it doesn't seem to know where a great deal of the new money flowing into the NHS over the past few years has ended up. We asked our economics editor, Stephanie Flanders, to dig deeper and find out what's happened to all that hard-earned cash.
Since the year 2000, Gordon Brown has injected an extra £20 billion into the NHS in England. That's about £1,000 for every English household. It's by far the biggest single financial commitment this government has made. And 5 years on, it does seem reasonable to ask, where did our extra £20 billion go?
You'd think it would be an easy question to answer. After all, we're talking about 20 billion of what is now a 70 billion NHS budget. 20 billion that wasn't there 5 years ago. But it isn't easy. In fact, it took us several weeks and a lot of phone calls to extract an answer from the Department of Health in a dossier they had to compile specially for us. Then we had to call in the experts to work out what exactly the figures meant.
The traditional complaint about the NHS is hasn't got enough money. And that as a country, given our wealth, we're not devoting as much money to healthcare as, say, France or Germany or the US even, and that we should be spending more. Well, we are spending more now, so the next problem is, well, are we spending it on the right things? Are we getting, in a sense, value for the money, the health pounds we're putting in? It's extremely difficult to find out where the money's gone.
The new data doesn't provide a complete picture of where our money's gone, but it does hold some surprises.
Take the cost of drugs. You'd think from all the headlines that new treatments would be hoovering up half the NHS budget by now. Well, we did talk to some insiders who were worried about the future cost of state-of-the-art cancer treatments, like Herceptin. But for the moment, the overall drugs bill seems more or less under control.
According to our data, new spending on drugs has soaked up about 15% of the extra 20 billion now flowing every year into the NHS. That's a lot, but pretty much in line with its share of the total budget. About 55 new hospitals have opened in the NHS in England in the past 5 years, and that has taken up some of the cash. In fact, the share of capital spending in the NHS budget's now about 2/3 higher than it was in 2000, but we're still talking a relatively small amount. Capital spending gives us another 13% of the £20 billion pie we're interested in. Research and development, another 1%. There's one growing piece of the budget, outsourcing to private providers, like the hip replacement operations at this privately run clinic, opened only 6 months ago next door to Trafford General, the hospital where Aneurin Bevan launched the NHS. As far as we can see, private outsourcing is still a tiny share of the budget, just 4% of NHS spending for Greater Manchester, for example. But nationally, all the NHS could say was that outsourcing was included in the other services that have mopped up around 1/5 of the new money. We asked for a breakdown of other services. They said it included supplies. Several experts we spoke to said that inflation in the cost of supplies was a growing problem for the NHS, but we're still left with more than half the money unaccounted for. Where has it gone? The answer is it's been spent on people.
Well, instead of targeting at increasing people's activity, they've essentially paid the money over in rather large pay claims. So the consultants have got about 3 billion out of it, the GPs about 2 billion, the agenda for change, that's the rest of the labour force, probably about 1.5 billion, and on top of that there are major implications for pensions payments from those wage deals. So a lot of it has gone into price increases for labour.
Now, not all the staff costs are pay. Around 6% of the 20 billion has been spent on increased training, another 22% on hiring new staff, but the rest, just over a quarter of the increase in the budget since 2000, has gone on higher pay for people working in the NHS.
How many weeks now? It's 30 weeks.
It's no surprise that a lot of the money's gone on staff. Nearly 2/3 of the overall NHS budget is people because it's a labour-intensive business. In fact, according to the head of the NHS, spending lots on staff was part of the game plan all along.
Well, what we decided in 2000 was two things really. We needed more staff. We needed more doctors, nurses and all the people who work in the various ways around the health service. But secondly, we also needed to make sure that we could recruit and retain people. So retention was as important as recruitment. But what you'll also see in our plans from that date was that we wanted people to work differently. So for example, with the GP contract which we introduced, GPs have got an increase in salary, but on the other hand we're expecting different things from them.
The question is, did they get enough for their money? There are now about 180,000 more people working for the NHS than in 2000. About 40% of those are doctors or nurses. The rest are clinical support staff, technicians and the like, and yes, managers and administrators. As a share of the overall workforce, the NHS says it has fewer managers than the average private business. But managers have been the single fastest growing group, up by nearly 1/3 since 2000. The same question arises when we look at the rocketing pay bill. Earnings across the NHS have risen by over 20% in real terms since 2000, more than double the 8% real rise in earnings economy-wide. And pay has been rising even more sharply in the past couple of years.
Well, if you add up things like the new contract for consultants and for nurses and other workers, but also the annual pay increase that all people get on top of that, then you're looking potentially at around half of the new increase this year, for example, has gone on pay. Now, not all a bad thing, and you could argue that it's a good thing. You know, what are we getting for our money then?
Hello, Mrs. Treadaway. Hello, how are you?
The NHS says the wage rises were needed to make up for years of wage squeeze in the 80s and 90s, and that they've brought more flexibility for the system and new responsibilities for staff. So far, that seems to be the result of the nurses' new contract, Agenda for Change.
We do more, we take on more responsibility, we take on a lot more of the jobs that the junior doctors would have taken on. We tend to take on those roles now, and obviously that's changed within the last few years.
And in return getting a bit more?
Yeah, and in return obviously our pay is, well, I think it's, it's quite good.
But the sheer extent of the pay rises has raised eyebrows, especially when it comes to the average doctor in general practice. One of the most controversial new contracts is the one for GPs. It was based on the idea that points win prizes, or in this case, money. Now, as the contract's gone into effect, GPs have won a lot more points than anyone expected and got a big increase in pay. Now, they say that's come with a big improvement in the services offered to patients,
But the question, as ever, is did the government overpay? In its keenness to reform the system, the government does seem to have set the GP's targets too low. In the first year of the contract, the average surgery scored over 90% of the points available.
In the first year, we were aiming at 900 points out of a maximum 1,050. We thought that would be achievable within the practice, but we actually scored 989 at the end of the first year. It was hard work, but we felt very pleased that we'd scored so well. I can show you on the screen some of the information that we've got for diabetes, and particularly points relating to blood sugar control, blood pressure control and cholesterol, and you'll see there that we did meet
Yeah,
most
so you're
of the
basically meeting exactly the target.
Yes,
Every time.
yeah, and in some of the cases exceeding some of the targets.
Did the GP contract work out as you'd expected?
I think in the first instance it was probably slightly more expensive than we expected, but but the reason for that was a very good reason. It was because actually we were paying for quality, and the GPs have actually produced a higher quality than we thought they would in the first year.
When you look at what the GPs are doing for this money, it does seem like they're getting a lot more money for doing things they should have been doing anyway.
Well, to some extent that's true, but it's not entirely true. I think in the first year it was obviously the first attempt, and it was a negotiation. I think that will settle down over a period, and I think you will see very clearly that the introduction of this new contract is giving better services in the community, and that we're getting real value for money as well as quality from it.
All the data shows productivity in the NHS has been falling as the budget has gone up. But we know there's a lot the figures can't pick up. For example, there are fewer people getting treated for back pain these days at Bolton Hospital, but that's because they're being diverted to a new musculoskeletal centre instead.
The way information is recorded about hospital activity is well known about. The activity in a service like this is not very easily measured because we're working at a different level, we're undertaking a lot of non-surgical treatments, and there's a lot of therapy and diagnostics involved in delivering that service, which are things that haven't been measured very accurately over the last few years.
It points up a much bigger problem with the figures. They don't tell us how many people haven't got sick because of better treatment down the line, or, by and large, what happens to people after they're treated. The result is we can't really answer the most basic questions. What's the NHS bought for our 20 billion in terms of better health, and did it pay too much?
The key lesson is to do the calculations, if you like, to really grapple with, I think, the fundamental issue, which is you'll have your targets for the health service. You want to achieve some benefits, whether they be improving access, improving healthcare. To do the calculations about how much that's going to cost. I mean, they are difficult calculations to do, but they're worth tackling so that we don't end up in a position now, looking back, having committed billions of pounds worth of taxpayers' money, and we're all asking this question, well, have we got value for money?
It is a bit odd. In the private sector, you wouldn't pour 20 billion into something and then decide afterwards, oh, I wonder how we're going to measure the benefits. It seems like it's been the wrong way around.
The important thing here is that some of the benefits are terribly obvious. You know? I mean, this was based on identification of what the problem issues were in 1999. So, waiting times. We weren't doing as well on hearts and on cancer as other competitor countries, if you like. We knew those things. We knew those were things that we needed to make improvement on. If we'd waited until the academics had produced for us a nice, smart formula, we might still be waiting.
The department is belatedly trying to focus more on the quality of treatment and on outcomes, like better health. They'll probably be incorporated in hospital contracts in a few years. The irony is that the NHS might finally get a handle on what our cash can buy, just as the really big money from the Treasury is about to dry up.
That was Stephanie Flanders trying to get to the bottom of that. Right. Tomorrow morning's front pages. The Guardian leads with the news of that enormous hole, despite the vast amounts of money that's been put into the NHS. The Financial Times has news of the increase in interest rates in the Eurozone. The Times has news that Gordon Brown is going to slap a further tax on landowners who sell land for the housing development that he says he wants to see taking place all over southern England. The Independent, Girl Next Door who became a suicide bomber, that's the Belgian girl who became a Muslim and then blew herself up in Iraq. Jessie's New Moon is some story about EastEnders on the front page of The Sun. And the Daily Telegraph, that literacy story we were talking about earlier, it construes it as largely a lesson in failure so far. Well, that's all from Newsnight tonight. Gavin will be here tomorrow with Kirsty on Newsnight Review. Before we go, though, to mark World AIDS Day, we leave you with portraits by the photographer Gideon Mendel of some of the fortunate few who are beginning to get antiretroviral medicines. They're all patients at a Médecins Sans Frontières project in the Eastern Cape in South Africa. The accompanying music is from the Lusikikizi Village Clinic Support Choir.
You've got to have someone who can actually ride the tide of events and pin the Labour government to the floorboards day after day after day.
How to be a Tory leader, Saturday at 7:20.
Out of the chaos of post-communist Russia, power was carved up by the few. A leader was chosen and expected to toe the line. He had other ideas. What happens when the puppet turns on his masters? Russian Godfathers, next Thursday at 9 on BBC Two.
We can see the most amazing things on digital television. There's seriously funny new comedy.
Robert!
And 2 channels just for children when you need them.
Can we fix it?
Not to mention some great films.
Not a lot of people know that.
Yeah. TV has definitely got better.
Get the 6 extra BBC channels without subscription for a one-off payment of either £150 on free satellite or from around £40 on Freeview. Also available on cable and satellite subscription services. Be part of something big. Call 08700 10 10 10 or visit your local retailer or supplier.
Now on BBC Two, Bond movies, British ballet, pantomimes and the Turner Prize in the Culture Show.
On tonight's show, visionary composer Philip Glass on the art of writing music for films.
I wanted to evoke the feeling of awe and of what we're about to see.
And Britain's biggest arts award, the Turner Prize. Is it time to scrap it? Also tonight, the design mastermind who created the look and feel of the classic Bond movies. British ballet, why is it running out of rising stars? Lights, camera, action, how to make a great short film. And as the Christmas season gets underway, we're in snowy Oxfordshire, where a production of Puss in Boots at the Chipping Norton Theatre is just one of dozens of pantos opening up and down the country. Welcome to the Culture Show. Whatever you think of it, the Turner Prize is the biggie in the art world, the one time of year where contemporary art marches onto the front pages and into the news bulletins. Past winners include Damien Hirst, Gilbert and George and Rachel Whiteread. But after more than 20 years, does it still tell us what's really going on in contemporary art? One man thinks not. Art critic Valdemar Janacek offers his short list of 4 reasons why he thinks the Turner Prize should be scrapped.
That fine American poet, Henry Longfellow, once wrote, "Great is the art of beginning, but greater still is the art of ending." I wonder if he had in mind the Turner Prize. This travelling stall is an official component of the 2005 Turner Prize. Judge for Yourself tour has already been to Victoria Station, Manchester Piccadilly and now Edinburgh. What's actually happening here is that a few intrepid souls are being enticed into this arena. So you pick one of these up and then you come and examine these monitors which are playing useful information about the Turner Prize. And when you've looked at those and read the placards, you can come out here and there's this blackboard where you can write useful things about the show. Someone's written, "I like Simon's cacti, but prefer Gillian's bottom. Art rules in Scotland, OK." And here we are, there's something from Janet Street Porter. "Better than looking at the timetable," says Janet. But I'm not sure about that. This is a sad, feeble, misguided and graceless marketing exercise. And it offers irrefutable proof of reason number 1 why the Turner Prize should be put out of its misery and knocked on the head. Because the whole thing has got so damn tacky. My second reason for calling it a day with the Turner Prize is out of basic human kindness to the artists involved. The fact is, winning this award has become a rather tragic career move. When you examine the list of previous Turner winners, you get a clear sense of an award that's gone horribly wrong. The first few winners, Gilbert and George, Howard Hodgkin, Richard Long, were genuine big hitters, tough enough to withstand winning the prize. But see what's happened more recently. If I say to you the name Grenville Davey, do you think to yourself, "Ah yes, Grenville Davey, Turner Prize winner, 1992. No, you don't. You'll be thinking, Grenville Davey. I wonder what happened to him.
Hello?
Is that Grenville Davey?
Yes, speaking.
I'm delighted to speak to you because I haven't heard much about your work recently.
Well, for the last 6 years, I've really been working with garden, but with regeneration project.
You're a landscape designer now. Let's skip forward a few years. You're an old man looking back on your career. Where do you think the Turner Prize, winning the Turner Prize, is going to feature in that?
It's a big thing to happen. It's undeniably a kind of high point, I think.
Good luck with the landscape garden in Grenville, and nice to talk to you. Goodbye.
The third reason for finishing off this monster is because the exhibition of shortlisted artists is, these days, so thoroughly unrepresentative of what's really going on in British art. This is the work of this year's favourite, Simon Starling. That's his notorious shed, which he dismantled in Switzerland, turned into a boat, floated it up the Rhine, and then turned it back into a shed again. Now, ignoring the question why he bothered to do all this,
What I want to know is, how does floating a boat up the Rhine constitute a valuable contribution to British art? The guy in the next room, Darren Almond, gives us a piece about his grandmother. He takes her to Blackpool and evokes the things she remembers. It takes about 10 seconds to get this piece, and then it just grows more boring. But that's not the worst thing about it. The worst thing about it is that it's so out of date. This kind of bleak, nocturnal video nostalgia could have won the Turner Prize 10 years ago, and indeed it usually did, because art has moved on, but the Turner Prize hasn't. The third room has a painter in it, Gillian Carnegie. Sounds good. Painting is where it's at the moment. It's art's trendiest area. This seems to be a painting of a black square. But when you look closer, you can see a tree. So although technically this is a painting, what it really is, in its heart, if it has one, is yet another dull, abstruse, joyless and unnecessary example of smarty pants conceptualism. In short, a typical Turner Prize exhibit. In the last room, Jim Lambie has taped some stripes on the floor and dotted it with kitsch sculptures of birds. Actually, this is the best thing in the show. At least it captures some of that gaudy, feral, anarchic energy of British art today. Nothing else in this parade of bores comes even close. Reason number 4 why the Turner Prize should be scrapped is because it's such a lottery. There's never a convincing reason why one person wins and the others don't. The judging is done behind closed doors in conditions of complete secrecy, like a rather creepy Freemasons meeting. But my spies tell me that what actually happens, and the results really bear this out, is that the judges are all blindfolded, like this. They're given a dart to chuck, spun around like so, and encouraged to throw it. It's a system that cannot fail. Jim Lambie. Well. I thought it'd be Lambie.
Valdemar Janacek. The winner of this year's Turner Prize will be announced next Monday evening, and the exhibition of the 4 shortlisted artists continues at Tate Britain until January 22nd next year. Now, music. Philip Glass, one of the world's most successful contemporary composers, is in Cardiff tonight to perform his music for the pioneering Catsy trilogy of films. A kind of elegy to the natural world and its destruction, the trilogy's blend of haunting music and extraordinary film images redefined the relationship between filmmaker and composer when the first film was screened more than 20 years ago. The Culture Show's Madeline Holt went to talk to Philip Glass about the art of writing music for pictures.
I look at an image and I hear a piece of music. It's as simple as that. It's about the movement of the eye and the heart and the mind. They're like long symphonic poems, which you come back to and find that they still mean something.
When Philip Glass and the director Godfrey Reggio released their hypnotic film Kyanis Katsi more than 20 years ago, they had not an inkling it would become a cultural touchstone. After Kyanis Katsi came Power Katsi and Nakoi Katsi, Hopi Indian words for life out of balance, life in flux, and life at war. The films had a serious message about the environment under threat from man. Kyanis Katsi picked up on the concerns of the growing ecology movement, not through banner waving, but a more subtle appeal to the eye and the ear. Collaboration was at the core of all three films. Glass and filmmaker Godfrey Reggio exchanged visual and musical ideas from the start.
Godfrey may start with images that he wants to work with, and then I'll write music, and then he has to start cutting to the music, and I start reshaping the music to the image. So there's a process, a true interchange and exchange between the filmmaker and the composer. I began with an organ piece, and that's this piece. I wanted to evoke the feeling of awe and of what we're about to see.